Good evening, everyone. All right, so I'm a black preacher. You got to talk back to me. Good evening, everyone. We welcome you to the St. John's Community Baptist Church. We're happy to host this community meeting for you. I'm going to open us up in prayer in just a second. I just want to remind everyone that we're all here for a good reason. We're here to find out some information. We have a right to, as I say in my counseling sessions, we all have a right to be assertive, which means that we can ask whatever questions we deem are necessary to ask, but what we don't have a right to do is to be aggressive, okay? We're assertive, but we're not aggressive. And so we want to respect the house that we're in and make sure that we honor the sacredness of the place. But by all means, make sure you get your questions answered. Amen? Amen. And so I'm going to open us up in prayer. Father, we do thank you for your goodness, your grace, and your mercy that you lavish upon us each and every day. We honor you today in our coming together, understanding, Lord, that government has been ordained by you according to the scriptures. Lord, you have set government up to do two very specific purposes: to commend those who do well and to punish those who do wrong. And so, Lord, we pray, God, for your spirit to be evident in this place. We pray, God, for forthrightness. We pray, God, for truthfulness. We pray, God, for the ability to speak the truth in love. We pray, God, for progress. We thank you for our city. We love our city. We thank you, God, for our mayor and his cabinet. We thank you, God, for the council members, those who are present and those who are not present. We thank you, God, for all the citizens of this place. New Ark, Lord, as it was originally called, is a place where you have set your seal and your approval. And we are attempting to bring your presence and your spirit into this city each and every day. I thank you, God, for all of our officials who are here in whatever capacity they're in. We pray, God, for peace in our city and peace in our country. And we pray for progress in our police department that we hold in high esteem. Jesus, you are an amazing God with amazing ways and amazing grace and amazing love. And we thank you that you smile upon us each and every day. In Christ Jesus' name I do pray. Amen.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Yannick Wood. I am the director of the Criminal Justice Reform Program at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. We are a member of the independent monitoring team of the consent decree between Newark and the U.S. Department of Justice. Welcome to this community forum, where in just a few minutes you will hear from the independent monitor, General Peter Harvey, and you will be hearing from the acting public safety director, Sharonda Morris, as well as Captain Carrilo of Newark Police Division. And unfortunately, Public Safety Director Fritz Frege could not be with us today. At the Institute, we believe that the voice of the community should be at the center of all conversations about public policy. Community voices are absolutely critical to the success of this consent decree, and that is why we have meetings like this. Thank you, Pastor Gilmore, for opening your church to be a gathering place for this important discussion. I want to recognize any elected officials, members of the Department of Justice, and members of advocacy organizations, and the media. Today is the 3-year anniversary of the officer-involved shooting and killing of Hassani Best in Asbury Park. Our prayers remain with his family. His tragic death underscores the importance of the work of the consent decree in strengthening police accountability and trust within the communities of Newark. We gather this evening out of shared concern for Newark and its future. But before we can look to the future, we must look to the past. Many of us, myself included, have no firsthand recollection of Newark in the 1960s. But I believe that there are members in this audience who have. And during this turbulent period, Newark convulsed with collective frustration over persistent police violence, culminating in the Newark Rebellion. These frustrations continued for half a century before the 2010 ACLU petition, which highlighted patterns and practices of unconstitutional misconduct, including widespread police violence, false arrests, and corruption. The Department of Justice conducted its own investigation, concluding in 2014, finding that 75% of pedestrian stops had no legal basis. 20% of the NPD's recorded use of force was unreasonable, and Newark's black residents were disproportionately subject to unconstitutional stops and arrests. Newark entered into a federal consent decree with the Department of Justice in 2016. And this consent decree subsequently resulted in the creation of 17 new policies, ranging from the use of force and its reporting to bias-free policing, police disciplinary processes, and a battery of audits to ensure compliance with these policies. The new policies and progress made under the consent decree is a result of the work and engagement of so many people in this room. And perhaps this contributed to the peaceful protests in Newark during the racial reckoning after George Floyd's murder. Newark sits at the crossroads as the continuation of the monitoring team is being decided by a federal judge. The work to transform policing in Newark has been tremendous, but incomplete. General Harvey will explain the most recent developments and the path forward. We encourage all parties to the consent decree to continue to work towards Newark's full passage of audits. As the Institute's president and CEO, Ryan Haygood, mentioned last year, during last year's community forum, Newark needs to take its full dosage of the consent decree, even if it has had some initial accomplishments. Ultimately, we are all on the same side cheering for Newark's success. So you will first hear from General Peter Harvey, who is the independent monitor for the Newark consent decree. He is a former Attorney General of our state, and if I might add, the first black Attorney General in New Jersey. He's a former prosecutor and currently a partner at the law firm Patterson Belknap. And after General Harvey concludes, he will then take some questions. And then you will hear from Acting Public Safety Director Sharonda Morris, and you will hear from Captain Leonardo Carrilo, who is of the Consent Decree and Planning Division. Then Captain Carrilo will be available, and actually Acting Public Safety Director Morris will also be available for question at that period. I kindly requested the audience members refrain from asking questions until after the speakers have concluded their remarks. A microphone for audience members will be circulating at that moment. Okay, so now I invite General Harvey.
Thank you, Reverend Gilmore. Thank you for once again hosting us here. Can you all hear me okay? I see the great Larry Ham back there. He's always value added to any discussion about community engagement and proper behavior of public officials, shall we say. So I am the monitor of the consent decree. The consent decree, to remind everyone, is a court order. It's an agreement between the City of Newark, including the police department, the division of police in the Public Safety Department, and the United States Department of Justice. That agreement has been reached, or was reached in 2016. It was filed in court. It is a court order. There is a judge, the Honorable Madeline Cox Arleo, who oversees implementation of the consent decree court order. I am the independent monitor. My role is to assemble a team, which we've done, and our starting point was looking at the policies in the City of Newark. I'm sharing this for those, some of you know this already, but I'm sharing it for those who may not. Our starting point was looking at the policies in the City of Newark with the police and determining what policies needed to be rewritten, what policies needed to be brand new that didn't exist. For example, Newark did not have, and many cities don't, a First Amendment policy that guides the police with respect to what First Amendment activity citizens can engage in on the street that is perfectly lawful. For example, citizens can record on a public street, if they're not obstructing the activities of police, they can record what's going on the street. We've all seen it throughout America. Well, it deserves applause because it's that recording that has transformed a lot of activities in a lot of cities, and it also allows law enforcement authorities to fairly assess what actually happened. But that policy ought to be embodied in a written document, and so Newark has that. Newark also has a policy that impacts other areas, a bias-free policing policy. It's one of the few cities that actually has a policy that says you cannot engage in policing that is biased and that it can subject you to disciplinary action. Other cities don't have it. Newark does. So we reviewed the policies with Newark. Newark rewrote some of their policies, wrote new policies in the areas, two of which I've just discussed. Once the policies got written, then we moved to training. So training had to be written consistent with the policies so that officers were now trained on what the new policies are or trained on the revisions to the policies. After that, then we come back in as a monitoring team and we conduct audits. Audits are a fancy word for just saying we come in and verify whether or not the activity on the street is consistent with the policies and consistent with the training. So we come in periodically, we ask for a random sampling of written reports, body camera footage, car camera footage, so that we can review it and make a determination as to whether the conduct that is occurring on the street is consistent with the policy and consistent with the training that Newark has adopted. There are some areas where Newark has had substantial compliance with the consent decree, and so they're no longer audited, meaning they've done a very good job in at least 2 consecutive audits. And as a result of doing that very good job, they have been relieved from those provisions of the consent decree with respect to the audit function. The idea is if they're doing it twice over an extended period of time, chances are the improvements have been institutionalized. The maintenance of training records is one area where Newark is no longer being audited. Newark has learned how to conduct training and how to keep accurate records of the officers who have and have not been trained. Secondly, with respect to body-worn cameras, Newark has shown substantial compliance with respect to deactivation of body-worn cameras, of categorization, meaning you are identifying in what category this activity fits, and activation of the body-worn cameras, activation, deactivation, categorization. Another area, the third area, where Newark has demonstrated substantial compliance is with respect to in-car cameras. There are cameras inside patrol vehicles. Newark officers have shown a proficiency in deactivating those cameras at the appropriate moment. And the fourth area is stops on the street where NPD has shown substantive compliance. So what I'm going to talk about now are the audits that we completed coming out of the pandemic, 2021, 2022. There are 5 that I'm going to talk to you about. Searches, with or without a warrant. Secondly, the second use of force audit. Thirdly, the first arrest with or without a warrant audit. The third body-worn camera audit. The second in-car camera audit. And then I'm going to talk to you about upcoming audits. As I said, our auditing process was slowed because of the pandemic. As you know, the state declared a state of emergency, the city declared a state of emergency, and in order to do these audits, you have to collect information, sit in a conference room, and we just weren't able to do that until after the pandemic was over because it just wasn't safe to do it. So coming out of the pandemic, we conducted an audit of NPD's activities with respect to searches with or without a warrant. That audit was conducted July 13th of 2021. It was the first audit of NPD's practices of searches with or without a warrant. What we learned is that what the audit revealed, let me let you know what the benchmark is. Nationally, when police departments are placed under a consent decree, the measuring standard is 95% compliance. Nationally, that is the standard, and that standard has been applied to Newark as well. So the audit revealed in July of 2021 that 48% of the events were compliant, both substantively and with respect to documentation, meaning the written reports. NPD attained a score of 65% in substantive compliance with respect to what they were doing on the street with respect to searches with and without a warrant. And what that equals was they were compliant in 130 out of 200 events. With respect to documentation, the compliance score was 52.50%, meaning that Newark was compliant in 105 of 200 events. Don't get discouraged because Newark got better. Second use of force audit. Now, the use of force audits are important because that is how many police organizations get themselves into trouble. They use force when it's not required, they use excessive force when it's not called for, or they don't de-escalate. Sometimes they escalate force. In our second use of force audit, we conducted that audit March of 2022. And that is consistent with consent decree paragraphs 173 and 180. What we learned is that, by and large, NPD is making substantial progress with respect to how it uses force, and it had a 94.23% compliance rate with respect to how it was using force and reporting its use of force. So with respect to its use of force, it was at 94.2% of the time officers were complying with the policy and the training that NPD has adopted. With respect to documentation, NPD was 92.31% compliant with respect to the reports that were filled out regarding use of force. You'll see with both numbers that Newark was compliant well over 90% with respect to the activities on the street and with respect to the reports that were written with respect to use of force. Again, 95% is the standard, the pass-fail standard, but Newark has shown dramatic improvement with respect to how it uses force, and its percentages bear that out. There, in May of 2022, we had the first arrest audit. That's arrests with or without a warrant. What it showed when we conducted this audit was that NPD attained a score of 99% for substantive compliance. That means that in 99% of the cases, Newark was undertaking arrests properly, following its policy, following its training. That means that out of that 199 out of 201 events that were examined, Newark was acting appropriately with respect to its on-the-street activity. With respect to documentation, that means writing reports to accurately capture what you're doing on the streets. We found that Newark was 95.52% compliant. That means that out of 201 events, Newark accurately wrote down documentation of what it did on the streets in 192 of 201 events. What we found was that meeting the standard of 95% as a passing rate, Newark PD was at 95.02 with respect to this particular undertaking, the first arrest with or without a warrant audit. We then turned our attention to the third body-worn camera audit and the second audit of in-car cameras. Body-worn cameras are important. It's valuable technology. I don't have to explain to you why. You've seen a number of videos on different media sites that capture what the officer is doing, and we examine that video and compare it to the written reports. Same thing with the car cameras. So in June of 2022, we conducted our third audit of body-worn cameras and our second audit of in-car cameras. Now, with respect to the body-worn cameras, as I mentioned before, there are three areas where Newark has shown substantial compliance, and we just don't audit it anymore because Newark has shown that it has institutionalized their practices. One is activation, another is deactivation, and a third is categorization, how Newark is categorizing and chronicling the activity that's shown on camera. The one area that we are still looking at in the subject of the body-worn camera audit is notification. When you have a body-worn camera on, you have to tell people that you are recording them. And you have to be sure that they are fully aware that they're being recorded. That's the notification requirement. So this is our third audit of body-worn cameras. Newark scored 84.55% on notification. Regarding in-car camera compliance, Newark achieved a compliance for deactivation of in-car cameras of 100%. So deactivating in-car cameras has reached a point of 100% compliance, and that's very good. So it's a 93.68% for activation with in-car cameras and a 92.85% for availability of video for rear seat transports. When a suspect is in a car, they obviously sit in the rear seat. There should be a camera that is activated that shows what's going on in that rear seat. What we found was in our audit, Newark was at a 92.85% compliance rate for the availability of video for rear seat passengers. It's close to 95%, but it's not quite there. We want to be sure that this technology is properly used and effectively used. The third component of the audit involved an inspection of marked cars. Those are cars that have the lights and sirens, and they're painted with Newark Police on the side. We want to be sure that of the cars that we randomly inspect, that all of the in-car camera equipment is working properly. And what we found was Newark achieved a score of 83.7%, not 95%. It means that some of the cameras were not working properly in the cars, and we have urged Newark to take a look at that. It's simply a technology issue. It's easily achieved. You just have to fix the cameras. And if they can't be fixed, you take them out and put new cameras in so that they operate properly. And that's what has to occur. We conducted, the consent decree asks the monitoring team to make an assessment of the outcomes in Newark. And we have made a first review of outcome assessments with respect to use of force. And what we have found in that Newark has made substantial progress. Let me give you an example of what we mean by that. In 2019, we found that 67.9% of the use of force incidents were compliant. That means that a significant number were not. If you look to 2021 and you compare the two, Newark substantially improved. It went from 67.9% to 86.5%. That's tremendous compliance with respect to use of force incidents. And so that is dramatic improvement. That means a couple of things. It means that the policies and the training are being implemented on the streets. It means that commanders and supervisors are paying attention to this. It means that officers are being reminded of what their obligations are with respect to use of force, how to use force, how not to use excessive force, and how to de-escalate when necessary. Further details about our use of force policy, use of force audit will be found in the 22nd semi-annual report. We have two of our semi-annual reports out there on the table. Feel free to take them and read them. We try to make them as plain as we can so that you can understand what progress is being made with Newark PD. So here are the audits that we are in the process of undertaking now. There is a first property audit. Now, there is a property room here that Newark PD uses that really should be rebuilt. A new one should be built because the one that is there, we have said from the outset of this monitorship, it's antiquated, it's in some areas dilapidated, it's not a good property room, and it doesn't reflect well on the city. I know the city is making plans about how to build a new property room, property and evidence room, and we encourage them to continue with those plans. We're going to conduct the first property audit. We have conducted it. It's been completed. It'll be summarized in our next semi-annual report. There is a second searches audit with or without a warrant. That audit has been completed, and we are in the process of issuing a final report on that audit. There is a second property audit that we have actually completed. We're reviewing the paperwork relating to that second property audit, and we hope to issue that report in the near future. There is a third use of force audit. We've completed that audit. The parties are reviewing our preliminary report, and we are in the process, I think we've sent it to the parties. If not, we are about to send it to the parties, and we'll issue a final report in the near future. There is an audit of supervisors, and we separated that audit from our usual activity because we wanted to understand what are supervisors doing. Are supervisors paying attention where officers are not fulfilling all of the requirements of the policies, all of the requirements of the training? And so we want to be sure that supervisors are doing their jobs, because sometimes sometimes the officer has to be reminded in the way that a good coach would remind a player how to do the job better, how to do the job consistently. And so we're conducting an audit of supervisors. It's currently underway because we want to know how supervisors are actually supervising the people under their charge and under their command. And I told you about the bias-free policing policy. We're going to conduct the first bias-free audit. It actually has been finished. But we're in the process now of writing our report on what has been revealed as a result of that first bias-free policing audit. And here are the audits that are scheduled. There is very few departments get training and experience on community engagement, community-oriented policing. Newark has a policy on community-oriented policing. And that policy requires officers, precinct by precinct, to engage with stakeholders in their community, whether they're senior citizens, community leaders, whether they're activists. Officers in that precinct are required to engage. Now, what the policy tries to accomplish is not leave this to 2 officers in a precinct, so that you have 2 officers going to a school with a DARE presentation. Rather, the policy contemplates that it's every officer's responsibility to engage with the community in an effective way. And so we're going to be conducting an audit very soon, the second community-oriented policing audit. That's going to be in November of 2023. And there will be a second bias-free policing audit in December of 2023 that we'll be conducting. So we have been active. NPD has been active, and what we hope to do is to issue these reports so that the community can read them and know exactly what is going on with Newark PD. And I really urge you to read the reports. They're online with the Newark Police Division. They're online with the city. They are available in hard copy, but you should read them because they really address each of the topics of the consent decree for that period of time, and they tell you how Newark is doing, and they talk about what future activities are going to look like. So overall, is the police division getting better? Yes, substantially better. Is it ahead in some areas as distinguished from other areas? Of course. You always have progress, greater progress in some areas than in other areas. But on the whole, this is a very different police organization than it was in 2016. There is substantial progress that has been made, and it has been made dramatically in certain areas. One area that will remain a challenge is the area of technology. It's just expensive to develop technology. It's expensive to implement technology, but we have to go to technology. Anyone who goes currently to a doctor now, you will notice increasingly that doctors come in with an iPad, and all of your medical records are literally on an iPad. They're not coming in with a collection of files, and if you go into these offices, you don't see racks of documents and files with patient names on them. That's what technology does. It condenses material. It gives you everything that paper will give you, but it gives it to you faster, it gives it to you more efficiently, and it gives it to you in a manner that you can read it any time of day, so you can keep track of the activities of your precinct and keep track of the activities of the police division. So we're looking forward to those kinds of technology investments that we hope will occur in the future, because it will make the work of supervisors easier and it will make the work of the officers easier. So that's where we stand right now. And before Newark PD talks to you about what their activities are, I'm happy to take any questions you may have about the monitorship or the monitoring process. Yes? Yes.
Okay, he asked me to ask the question again. Could you comment about, have any of the statistics changed on how internal affairs is handling matters? And my second question is, how we doing with the Civilian Complaint Review Board? I know that there was a lot of pushback from the police unions in terms of what they were able to do or can't do. Thank you.
Sure. For question number one on internal affairs, yes, there is dramatic progress in that area. If you look at our year-end reports, you will see a change between 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. The change you will notice is Whereas in the past, there were very few investigations and almost no discipline. What you'll notice today is a couple of different things. You'll notice that there are civilians being disciplined and in some cases terminated. There are police officers being disciplined and in some cases terminated. Now, they can challenge their termination, but the division is investigating these allegations made against officers and taking them seriously. In the days prior to the consent decree, here's what happened. You made a complaint against a police officer. The average length of time that that officer was interviewed about the complaint was 7 minutes. What we also learned was that complainants were read Miranda rights, and they were essentially, it's a subtle way of saying, you better be sure you're telling us the truth, because if not, we're going to prosecute you. We're going to arrest you for lying to the police. The consent decree changed that. Also, officers were permitted to sit in the same room together with one another and develop a statement that they were going to make to internal affairs. That behavior has all changed. Now, we've had the New Jersey State Police come in and give training on internal affairs. We've had other kinds of independent training on internal affairs. We've changed over a number, I shouldn't say we, the Newark police director has changed many of the personnel in internal affairs. And now complaints are uniformly handled. Officers, detectives there are developing investigative plans. Witnesses and persons who are making allegations against police officers are treated with respect and dignity. That does not mean that every complaint gets affirmed, every complaint gets validated, but it does mean that the process is a lot more fair, a lot more objective, and it's being reviewed by supervisors who are really paying attention. And as a result, you have officers who are being disciplined, sometimes being terminated. And as I said before, civilians who are facing the same result. You also have something happening in Newark that didn't happen before, and that is officers reporting other officers for misconduct. That suggests a healthy department. When officers are saying, look, I'm not signing up for that. I don't think you did right here, and I'm not being roped into that. That's you. And I have a duty to report under the policy, so I'm going to report this, because I don't want supervisors to think I was complicit in this and that I helped you in some way to hide it. That's internal affairs. Now, you should know that internal affairs is a subject of litigation, both with respect to the policy and with respect to the disciplinary matrix. In other words, the schedule of fines and suspensions and terminations. That is now the subject of litigation. I don't quite know where that litigation is. It's in the New Jersey court system. The unions have challenged it, and we'll see how it turns out. That's one area we have not been able to audit. We report on it by getting the disciplinary information from NPD, but we haven't been able to audit it because until we know what the exact policy is going to be and what the exact training is going to be and what the disciplinary matrix is, it's not fair to NPD to measure it now because it's unsettled as to what the ultimate policy is going to be, the ultimate training, and what the ultimate disciplinary schedule is going to be. You had a second question, and it slipped my mind. Civilian Complaints Review Board. That's paragraph 13 of the consent decree. We really don't have an audit function with the CCRB. I cannot tell you whether they're meeting or not meeting, where they're meeting, if they're meeting, because they are not part of our audit. Our audit is limited to NPD, not the CCRB. They have the authority to act, and as you know, they have been formed. But as to what their weekly, monthly, semi-annual, or annual activities are, they have no obligation to report it to us, and we don't have any obligation to audit them. But one of the reasons why, I'm glad you asked this, let me pivot for a second. One of the reasons why we press NPD on report writing is so the CCRB can review it after the fact and understand what happened. If you have spotty reports or reports with missing information, it's very difficult for civilians to look at what happened and to make an assessment about what happened. So I don't want you to think that we're picking on NPD when we assess them on documentation and the documentation isn't quite right. We're doing that because we want officers to write complete, comprehensive reports and not use boilerplate language. We want them to explain what happened so, number one, their supervisors know what happened. And then secondly, the CCRB, if it wants to take a look at a particular period of time or a particular squad or a particular location, they can go to the reports, look at them, and they will understand exactly what the officers were doing. Yes. Well,
I'm sorry, you called on me.
we have two questions here. I have no preference.
I had a question with the undercover police. Where do they fit in?
Well, there are some, the policies apply to all officers. So whether you're undercover or in uniform, it's not as if the bias-free policing policy doesn't apply to you, the First Amendment policy doesn't apply to you, or the use of force policy doesn't apply to you. All of these policies still apply to you. Now, what may not apply to you is a body-worn camera. Maybe in some circumstances it does, in some circumstances it doesn't. And that's for officer safety. If an officer is undercover and running an operation, trying to infiltrate a group that is engaging in systemic criminal behavior, that officer is not going to be wearing a body-worn camera, and that's for the officer's safety. Also, that officer may not have an in-car camera because the officer is undercover, and the officer is trying to create the impression that they are just out in the street so they can draw illegal activity to them, or they can infiltrate it and figure out what's going on. But the policies with respect to use of force and arrests with or without a warrant, or searches with or without a warrant, apply to all officers, and nobody is excepted from it.
Good evening, Mr. Harvey.
Yes.
My question is, I know you said in November you'll be doing a community engagement audit.
Yes.
So will you be talking to residents in the community, or will everything be written by the Newark Police Department on what they do in the community?
Well, it's going to be a combination of both. We're going to be assisted in that task by the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. They are our community engagement experts on our monitoring team. Part of the policy requires Newark to engage with the community and officers to write reports about it. And that's part of what we're going to measure. Were you having the meetings, and did you write a report about it? Because if you're not writing a report about it, how do we know it happened? Okay, we know it happened, but how do we know what was said? How do we know what the community reported to you? And the point about community-oriented policing, it's not just about crime. It's about public safety. It's about, is somebody using this street for a cut-through on their way to and from work and driving down the street 50 miles an hour and their kids playing down here? Is it an issue with a particular park? Is it an issue with some vacant land that's full of trash that needs to be cleaned up? Police officers can engage with the community about that. Maybe it's about street lights, and why is it so dark on this street? Why are these lights never replaced? The police, in talking with the community, can say to Public Works, hey, you need to replace these lights. Well, they keep shooting them out. I don't care. Keep replacing them. That's what we're going to do. Let's clean up this vacant lot. Kids play here, and we don't want them playing on glass. So to answer your question directly, there will be a conversation with the police about what are they doing. There will be a review of their reports, and there will be conversations with members of the community. And again, the way the community engagement policy is written, it's precinct by precinct. So it's not some centralized location downtown. I might add that Newark is one of the few cities with a community oriented policing policy. Not many cities have it. And I dare say most cities don't know how to do it. So you'll hear community policing, which can come across as more presence in the community, but that's not necessarily engagement. Engagement is talking to people in that neighborhood to find out what their needs are with respect to public safety. There may be abandoned cars on the street that need to be towed and impounded somewhere. But that's a conversation that we're encouraging Newark to have precinct by precinct. And yes, we are going to talk to community members to find out whether you are being engaged or whether you are not. You're welcome. Young lady up here had a question. She's been very patient.
Good evening.
Yes.
Are uniform officers required to activate their body cam when approaching a civilian for engagement, or just coming to question them? And also, how long does the body cam recording stay in the Newark police system for review? And are civilians allowed to request and review the body cam incidents after filing the complaint? And how long does it take the supervisor to contact the civilian?
Officers are required to activate the camera under certain circumstances, and the policy will tell you what it is. By the way, these policies are online, so there's no secret to them. If you go to the NPD's website, you can go read it, and it'll tell you if it's law enforcement activity, the body camera has to be activated. If it's just, hey, how are you doing, you don't have to activate the camera. But if it's some sort of law enforcement activity, the camera has to be activated. But again, I would urge you to go to the website and read the body-worn camera. The length of maintaining the video depends upon what the video shows. If it shows criminal activity and it's the subject of charges that have been filed and being considered by the Essex County prosecutor, that tape has to be maintained. Now, you may not get access to it because the Essex County prosecutor's office may tell you it's the subject of an ongoing investigation, and so you can't have it. But if the investigation has been closed and it's a matter of interest, chances are you can probably submit a request to review the videotape. In terms of how soon can the supervisor get back to you, it depends on the method by which you seek review. If you use the Open Public Records Act and you are entitled to view it, you have to get a response within a certain period of time, and the Oprah law says what that time period is. It's rather quick. It's generally within a week. Somebody has to get back to you and respond to your inquiry. And the response is to tell you whether you're going to get it or not get it, or whether it's the subject of an ongoing investigation. And you had another question about, did I answer everything? Okay. Yes, sir. I have no preference. I'm sorry, I didn't see you over here. Yes, sir. Hold on, I don't think your mic is working right now.
Is it yellow right there?
There we go.
Yes, I'd like to thank you for giving a very enlightening and professional review, community review. But I'd like to know, is there any way that we can get maybe like a printout or a copy of we could get some type of copy of what you're saying tonight? Because this is very good. You're doing a very good job. I like to
You're
get the
very
copy
kind
of
to
it.
say
Back
so.
to it.
Well, I have a good team. I have people who help. And I might say we're also helped because Newark PD is cooperative. You know, we're not in a city where we're fighting with Newark over getting access to records and videos and stuff like that. They're very collaborative, and that's what reform is collaborative reform. I would urge you to get the reports that are out on the table. And what I've told you here is reflected in those reports. Secondly, if you want to go back and look at our prior monitors' reports, they're online with the city of Newark. They're right in the NPD and the city. So go there and do a search for independent monitors' reports, and they're all there. And you can read them one by one, and we don't write them as if we're sending them to judges and lawyers. We write them in plain language so you understand what the topic is, because we want members of the community to understand what is going on with the police department, what are they doing well, what are they not doing so well, and what the road ahead looks like. But grab the two reports that are back in the back, and I think you'll find a lot of this information in there.
It might die? Okay. All right. Thanks, Sonnet. Mr. Harvey, thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I can hear you. Well, I could a moment ago. I think I still can. Yes. Okay, let me take your third one first. Compliance means that you've met the 95% threshold. And, right. Well, it's,
Getting paid to do that work. And if we're going to leverage the resources and wisdom of community, we should also be resourcing those organizations. So that was just our urging to the Institute and others to actually support community in other ways, not just having the conversation. Back to the questions.
sure.
Thank you.
Back to the question. Yeah, there are substantive compliance obligations. Now, the consent decree is written in very generalized language about engagement with the community. It talks about having a community engagement strategy. It talks about having conversations, doesn't really say conversations, but it talks about how the NPD should try to build a better relationship with the community, hence the policy. The policy outlines certain requirements for NPD to undertake precinct by precinct. And I would urge you to read it because there are certain deliverables. There are reports that are required. There are meetings that are required. And those are the substantive concepts that are embodied in the policy. And we're going to, when we conduct the audit, we're going to come out and find out, well, have you met with the stakeholders? Have you identified the stakeholders in your precinct? Have you met with them? How often do you meet with them? What have you talked about? Have you written reports about what the engagement? Have you set forth goals or strategies or upcoming tasks that should be completed? That isn't a knock on coffee with a cop. It's not a knock on pizza with a cop. That's an activity, but that's one activity. There has to be more than that. And the police, we hope, are going to be guided in part by what the community members in that precinct share with them about what the community says are the priorities. That doesn't mean that the police are going to do what the community says, I think you should do this, but at least the police are open to hearing it and talking about it. And sometimes the conversations may be uncomfortable, but I think that the conversations have to be had, And it's really important. I think Reverend Gilmore said it best. You know, each of us is entitled to our own opinions about these things, and we're entitled to a perspective about it. But we can talk civilly with one another, and we can engage with one another so that we don't become antagonistic, because everyone is trying to get to the same goal: a safer neighborhood, a safer street. And the question is methodology. How do we get there? So there are substantive requirements, and there are substantive deliverables. We just want to be sure that it's comprehensive. And that's why we conduct the audits, to say, here's what your policy says you should be doing. Are you actually doing it? And what we expect is that NPD will get better and better at it. But few cities know how to do it. Few cities even have a policy that tells them how to do it. Newark has been working on this policy for some time, and they're difficult to write. They're aspirational, but there is one now. And we're going to examine with the Institute, is it being implemented, and if so, how well, and what is the outcome of its implementation? Is it actually helping? And you make a very good point. There are community organizations and community leaders that ought to be engaged. And we're hoping NPD does that. We're hoping they'll find out about these organizations because they engage with the stakeholders in that precinct. They'll find out about these leaders because they engage with the stakeholders in that particular precinct. And the conversation can go on. And again, I don't think we should be discouraged if some of our early conversations are not as pleasant as we would like them to be, because we're raising expectations. And the community wants a safer community. NPD wants to deliver a safer community. And the question is, how do we get there? And we get there over time. Look, I mean, the reality is, unfortunately, America has a violence problem. I mean, we do. We have a serious problem with violence in this country. We have over 300 million guns, with people having multiple guns. And there are people who are angry and they engage in criminal behavior, either because they want money or because they just hurt people. And the question is, how do we talk to the community about making that neighborhood a little safer, identifying with particularity who are the bad actors in that community and separating them from people who just have a particular style and they're not menacing or threatening or anything. So that's a dialogue, that's a conversation, and we're going to come in and audit and see how that conversation is going.
Thank you. Attorney General Harvey, thank you for being
Yes,
here
sir.
tonight. I'm trying to just trim the fat and get right to the question.
Sure.
But my name is Solomon Williams, serve as the Deputy Director for the Newark Community Street Team. We work on violence reduction work here in the city of Newark, also across the state of New Jersey. Just getting back to the community side, because that's who I'm representing today. Can you just give us a little insight of how do we change policy if we're meeting with Newark Police Department and they're not taking feedback? How do you expect us to change the policy? And I just also want to point out, I said this last year, we were here at this space last year, it's the little things in Newark when we talk about safety, why we need the consent decree to still be in place. My biggest fear is that when the consent decree leaves, we'll go back to old habits, even with the policy in place. And I'll give you an example. This is a very, very small example, and I gave it last year, and it still hasn't changed. When we look at the city of Newark, Newark is divided into the 5 respective wards, but we look at policing in general. I was out here earlier on Bergen Record Street, and I saw law enforcement pushing cars away from double parking. Again, this is just basic stuff here, right? If we go to the North Ward or the East Ward, we can see people double park and triple park. And when we talk about health and safety of people, the mindset of people, how do you expect, again, community to believe in this policy change, and how can we affect change when it's not being heard? I also just want to point out, since the change of the last public safety director, Ambrose, who's doing great work out there in Minneapolis, O'Hara, thank you. Yeah. O'Hara, thank you, who's doing great work out there. Since we had a change in directors, we have seen less community engagement from our new public safety director. I do want to put that out there for the record. But again, if you could just give me a little bit of game, because we've been trying to figure out how to work with police and move policy that keeps our kids safe. Give me some game, Attorney General, that will keep our kids safe here in the city of Newark.
Well, I think it's a very good question. I think your starting point is the policy itself. I would urge you to go, I'm sure you've read it, print it out and read it. Secondly, have a meeting with the precinct leaders where you live, or if it's another community where you're trying to help people in that community, have a meeting with the precinct leaders there with the policy in hand and say, tell me what we're doing here in this community.
But just to be clear, we do that often every other Tuesday on the conversation in South Florida, and we still are waiting for answers from like 2 years ago. You know, Attorney General. So we're at that point where we're meeting with law enforcement. We brought up policies that are in as real racist, right, and it harms black folks, but it hasn't changed over the past 2 years. And so if you could give me game past that, like we're meeting with them already, they stopped showing up because we've been asking tough questions, and again, our community is still being harmed.
Well, I think you have to talk to, if you're not getting traction at the precinct level, don't stop there. I would ask to meet with the police director. And what are the issues that you're trying to raise that you're not getting an answer?
I'll save the space here. I'll save the space and we could talk afterwards. Even though I want to go see my daughter,
Well,
but I do want to. I want to say that
you have the Newark PD right here.
I know my man Leo
So-
is over there. I know
so
Leo's over there.
You're going to have a chance tonight to talk about this and
Yeah, so we're looking at some of the policies, really like basic stuff. Again, we've been trying to get crossing guards to increase the amount of crossing guards so kids can go to school safely and come back home safely. We've had at least 10 kids who were hit by a car last year in the city of Newark that has been unaddressed. We're looking at, again, you guys talked about evidence. We work with victims of crime all the time, and we know that the personnel, their items are being taken when they're in the hospital and not returned to them. And so there's some stuff like that we're talking about. And it just overall, like, how do we really include the community in public safety, even though it's a privatized institution, policing is? How do we actually put public safety back in the hands of the public? Because right now, again, we have conversations, again, and we still don't see the results that keep us safe, not results that line the pockets of whoever is getting paid to do it.
I would urge you to, before this meeting is over, have a conversation with Newark PD personnel here, because you have leaders here who can make decisions and they can implement some changes. I mean, what you're raising are the kind of public safety issues that are important: crossing guards. You're talking about double parking. I mean, these are pretty basic issues that should be addressed, and it's something we're going to assess as part of our audit. I can tell you this: I was out in a community in California, and I saw crossing signs for crosswalks that every time I crossed a certain threshold, they started flashing on both sides of the street, which alerted the drivers on this street that somebody was in the crosswalk. And for the life of me, I don't understand why we don't have more of this in New Jersey. It was in an area that wasn't as heavily traveled as, say, Broad Street and some other areas. And I thought we need to really invest in this kind of technology, because it alerts the driver that you've got to slow down. And I think these are the kinds of conversations that we're hoping take place in these community discussions, precinct by precinct. But don't leave tonight without having this conversation with Newark PD. They're here. They will listen to you. And I think you will get a different result. I don't think they're not trying to do it. Let me put it to you that way. I don't think they're trying to ignore you. And it may be a particular officer who's just not being attentive. And that can be corrected. Yes. Yes, you. Yes, yes.
So my question is, how do you track the trends? Well, my name is Patricia Rosado. I'm from the Shoulders, a community member from Ironbound in Newark. I guess my question is, how do you track the trends that do not meet the 95%? What happens to the cars with no rear cameras? What's the percentage of officers reporting other officers? You had mentioned that NPD was only 55% in compliance, but I forgot for what again? And if so, then how accurate was that reporting on them internally? And what happened to those officers after? And then you spoke about technology. When you say
Yes.
technology, it gives the tone of AI surveillance and tracking all of us individually. That's just like the holistic feeling of all of it. But can you actually define what technology you're talking about in your statement and how it will be tracked? Hold on. Will the technology you're talking about for documentation purposes be accessible for the public?
Probably not,
Okay.
particularly if it's investigative and if it deals with routine patrols. It won't be. The technology I'm talking about is how do we have reports that are accessible to supervisors and leaders in the NPD so that they can read it and they don't have to go to a file room and go file by file to read about an officer. So they can put in an officer's name and badge number and pull up body camera footage, car camera footage. They can pull up reports that the officer has written. That's the kind of technology we're talking about. I'm not talking about surveillance technology.
Okay,
at all.
that's good to know. I just wanted to note that for the record. And do you have any plans to track how much of the budget will be allocated for technology advancements?
I do not. No
Okay.
plans to track the budget because that's not part of the consent decree.
Okay.
We have no authority to direct Newark to spend any money on technology. Newark will have to make that decision itself. We comment on it, but we have no authority to order it or direct it, and I'm not sure the court does either.
Okay.
What we can do is just assess compliance or not. You wanted to know about the 55%
Yeah.
compliance rate. That had to do with in-car cameras. And let me tell you specifically what it dealt with. Let me see, let me be sure that I think what you may have heard, let me check to be sure this is what you heard. With the in-car cameras, there was a score of 84.55% for notification. Is that what you're referring to?
I'm not sure.
Because very early on, the lowest score Newark got came out of a July 2021 audit. That July 2021 audit had to do with searches, with or without warrants. And the audit revealed that 48% of the events were compliant substantively and with respect to documentation. That's a low score.
Yeah.
And what it means is that NPD attained a score of 65% substantively, meaning what they did on the street with respect to searches with or without a warrant. And we looked at 200 events. So they did it well in 130 of 200 events. With respect to the documentation regarding searches with or without a warrant, there was a 52.50% compliance, meaning that out of 200 events, 105 were compliant. So that might have been, that was the lowest score Newark got. They got better as we went to other areas in 2022.
Right, and my question is, what happened to those officers after? How do you track that?
Well, it's not so much that the officers are engaging in behavior that is intentionally wrong. They're not doing it. And it doesn't mean that their activities, that they're trying to hide their activities on the street, or that they've engaged in criminal behavior, or that they've engaged in improper behavior. It just means that when it came to the officers doing their jobs on the street, they weren't in compliance with their own policies. They had oversights. And it came to documentation, they weren't filling out the reports properly. And that was in 2021. They have gotten better, in part because we've audited them. We've told NPD, you've got to get better in these areas. NPD pays attention to it, and supervisors then engage in better supervision of the officers. So it gets better with time. But that's the point of the audit, to say you're not doing well in this particular area, you need to pay more attention to it. But it's not because officers, we didn't find any activity that violated the federal constitution or the New Jersey state constitution or any particular laws.
Like I'm only asking these questions because I'm a communications person. I always like track,
Please.
like where do we hit, where our hits are going, and then where have we failed, and we fail a lot. So I guess just the overall big picture question is like what happens, or how do you track those that don't meet the 95%? So again,
When you say how do we track, what do you mean?
how do you follow it in the trends?
Well, that's actually what the supervisory audit is about. You as a supervisor, how are you following what people under your command are doing or not doing? When you read these audit reports and you see that people under your command are not complying with the policies, what are you doing to make them better, to educate them, to make sure they're in compliance? That's what the supervisory audit is about.
Okay, so would this question be more accurate for NPD or not you?
NPD.
NPD, I got you. I will ask this again later. Thank you.
Yes, yes, sir.
First, I want to thank you for coming.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, first I want to thank you for coming.
Sure.
I want to
Glad to
thank
be here.
Reverend Gilmore. I see my friends over there at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Hi. So my name is Rick Robinson. I serve as chairman, as you already know, for New Jersey State Conference, NAACP, Newark, New Jersey, NAACP, and of course the Civilian Complaint Review Board. So our concerns are, in all my different titles and organizations, we want to help this effort. All right, so you mentioned earlier that if somebody wants to obtain some kind of information, should they call the federal team or should they call NPD?
NPD.
Okay, all right. Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan. I meant to mention, hi, New Jersey Institute of Social Justice. I don't want you to see me later and say I didn't say anything. The other thing is it possible, and this may not be applicable to you, since you told me NPD, that the CCRB would like to actually possibly meet with either the federal monitoring team or the Newark Police Department on a quarterly basis so we can share the information and so we can help get that information out so we can actually have a better working environment in the city of Newark?
I would urge you to certainly meet with NPD on a quarterly basis. That makes a lot of sense. It's harder with our monitoring team because most of us are out of town, meaning, and we're doing the audits. So we will meet periodically with you, and we're happy to do it. We can schedule a meeting, but I just can't promise you quarterly. But I certainly can promise you a meeting in the fall if you want one. We're happy to sit and talk with you about it, and we'll do a meeting here in the city. We did. We sure did. We do it at the Institute. Sure, you're welcome. Okay, I'll take this as the last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Newark so you can hear from the police.
How you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
I got a question I haven't quite formulated, but I'm picking up on the Newark Street team
Yes.
and other organizations that are engaged and committed, in most part voluntarily, to community safety. I was just wondering how the call center that receives, an incident has happened or whatever.
You mean the 911 call
Yeah.
center? Yes.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
know-
better question for Newark PD. They would be able to tell you what they're able to share with you about how that operates.
Okay, because I know there was discussion early on about that. My question has to do with, is there any discussion or consideration of how those calls are related to what resources are dispatched? Meaning the police in conjunction with the street team or the Office of Violence Prevention, especially in instances of mental situations.
It's a better question for NPD. They can tell you how they
All right,
allocate
you
those
got that.
calls. This really is the last question, so that NPD, you can hear from NPD. Yes, please.
Yeah, before you speak, if I see that there's a few people who have additional questions, so if people want to ask you additional questions, how could they do that?
Oh, they can talk, we can talk afterwards.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'm not gonna run out.
Okay, all right.
It's not like the governor came and gave you a speech and then ran out the door to the next event.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you, sir,
You're
for
welcome.
indulging us.
Sure.
Just have 2 questions to ask, and I'll be very brief.
Sure.
Is there an internal or an audit investigative process for official misconduct of law enforcement personnel that intentionally engages in improper behavior, specifically around the harassment of civilian employees considered whistleblowers? And then, how are complaints against internal affairs handled?
If there is an allegation about police misconduct and it's made to internal affairs, if they cannot handle it, they refer it to the Essex County Prosecutor's Office, and that's who investigates it. And the Essex County Prosecutor's Office determines what should be done next, or not, or whether it's just referred back to NPD for an administrative investigation. Regarding whether or not you know, what is done with, I'm trying to be sure that I answer what you're trying to know. You want to know about what is done with officers where a complaint has been made, and maybe a complaint against internal affairs. Is it against the entire unit or against one officer? Well, if it's against one officer, someone else will investigate it. If it is, I would find it hard to imagine that a complaint is being made against the whole unit for some misconduct, unless the complaint is, no one will investigate my complaint. If the question, if what you're trying to know is, how do I get someone to investigate my complaint? I think you have to go down and have a meeting with the commander of internal affairs, and if that won't be investigated, I think you have to go to the police director and raise that issue, what the complaint is and the fact that it doesn't seem to be getting investigated. But if you have a complaint against someone in internal affairs with respect to misconduct by that officer, there will be another officer under the protocol assigned to investigate that complaint. It won't just be ignored. Sure.
Thank you so much. All right, you'll now be hearing from Acting Public Safety Director Sharonda Morris, and then following her presentation, you'll be hearing from Captain Carrilo.
Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to thank Pastor Gilmore for allowing us to use this space here. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for attending, all the citizens that were able to get out tonight. I'm thankful that you guys are able to come out and speak with us and to go over all the information that's brought before you. I want to thank the monitor and the DOJ for helping the city lay foundation for the NPD to emerge as a world-class law enforcement agency. I'm happy to report that Newark Police is not the same agency I joined in 1998. Because of the consent decree, every officer participates in mandatory 40 hours of training each year on community policing, implicit bias, and stop, search, and arrest practices. Because of this consent decree, every officer is wearing a body-worn camera to record interactions. And we also have an all-force investigation team that investigates use of force for Newark police officers. Because of the consent decree, we collaborate with the community in meaningful ways on a regular basis. Our goal is to emerge from the consent decree as an agency that is better equipped to address public safety in a way that is supportive and respectful of the community I swore an oath to serve. Now, while I'm here, I want to introduce our team for the consent decree. We have Deputy Chief Suarez, who's back here in the back. And any of these guys will speak with you if you have any questions after, the presentation. You can speak with them. We have Captain Carrilo, who you'll hear from in a little bit. He's been with the consent decree, most of these guys, almost since the beginning. He's been since 2018 with the consent decree, so he's very knowledgeable, and he's been there almost since the beginning. We also have Captain George, who's back there in the rear, and he has also been with the consent decree for a while. And we have Captain Rios and also Sergeant Phoebus, who kind of splits her time between the consent decree and also community affairs. So if you have any issues or concerns about community affairs, you could speak with Sergeant Phoebus over there. I'm sure a lot of you guys have probably seen her out when we do our National Night Out and all the other events that we do, that she's there. Now, before I bring up Captain Carrilo, who's going to be able to answer your questions about the consent decree, just to tell you a little bit about myself. Like I said, I've been with the department since 1998. I've kind of moved along through all the precincts except for the East District. I like to stay up top here. I can't deal with that traffic. So I've been kind of around for a little bit in a couple of units. I've also been in internal affairs. I was in Office of Professional Standards for 5 years. I was there as the sergeant, as the investigator, as the executive officer, and also the commanding officer, until I got tapped for this position by the mayor, Raz Baraka. So if you have any questions with internal affairs, and I'll kind of try to remember some of the questions that came along as I was here listening to you guys. Complaints, we accept all complaints. You should never get turned away for any complaint. Now, we even take anonymous complaints. We take complaints from children with their parents, of course. We take complaints from any way you could bring it in. You could call it, you could go online, you could put a complaint in, you could go to any of the precincts. They accept complaints at the precincts, and everything kind of gets funneled over to the Office of Professional Standards, which is internal affairs for you guys who are used to calling it that. And we take it seriously. And I know from the time that I was there in internal affairs that all investigations are taken seriously. And as you can see, like Peter Harvey had mentioned, we're a lot better than we used to be. I know especially from the time I came into this department, many, many moons ago, until the time that I was there in Office of Professional Standards, we prosecute a lot of officers. We deal very closely with the Essex County Prosecutor's Office. Whenever it's a criminal offense, they investigate it, and we investigate administrative complaints. So that it's two different functions. So they don't allow us to do the criminal part. They take that from us. So there's never a time where your complaint is not going to be taken seriously, or it's not going to go to the completion of the investigation because they pick it up. So we're not allowed, there's no pushing stuff under the rug. We don't do that. You know what I'm saying? We do investigations, and it's to the completion. You can always go down to Internal Affairs, get an update on your complaint, speak to the commander down there at Internal Affairs. If you're talking about getting access to the body-worn cameras, like Peter Harvey had mentioned earlier, that's something that is, if it's a part of the investigation, then you won't have access. But you can always, once the investigation is completed, make an open request to get that type of information. So you always have access to that stuff. I heard a mention about the school crossing guards. Now, I kind of had a little hand in that for a couple of years since I've been up where I'm at now in the Public Safety Director's office. I'm actually the Deputy Police Director, so I'm right there with the Public Safety Director on a daily basis. And at one time I was tasked with looking into the crossing guards. And believe me, we try to hire crossing guards 365 days a year. We don't turn people away for crossing guards. We actually, because a lot of the times, the crossing guards are a lot of senior citizens, there's a lot of elderly people that apply for those positions, and that's because of the hours. The hours are kind of, inconvenient for people if you have a regular job, so a lot of time we get the senior citizens. We actually bring them in, we walk them through the process. We fill out the paperwork with them hand in hand in our office so that we make it easier for them. And then they have to take their stuff home, and a lot of times we don't get it back or they don't follow through. But trust me, we are always hiring crossing guards. We put stuff out on our social media. We push stuff out through the school system to the parents if they want a part-time, stuff of that nature. And I'm saying this from firsthand experience because I dealt with it. So it's not like we don't put crossing guards because we don't want to. What we have on hand is what we use in the best way possible that we can. And like I said, if you know anybody, send them to us. We're always hiring crossing guards. I go to most of the council meetings, and we tell the council president, we tell the council members, we give them information to put on their sites, to put on the city site. We run it periodically on our social media. So that's something that we always do. So if you, like I said, if you know anybody, send them our way. We will definitely, do it. And with the community service stuff that we do, just to speak on that, and then I'll get Carrilo up here, is that we deal with the Office of Violence Prevention a lot. So we do deal with, the community teams that's out there. We actually invite them into our ComStat, which we have every week, and we do a lot of referrals. So we try to refer to them a lot of the juveniles that we deal with, the shooting victims, and stuff when they're dealing with crimes, we refer. And we do that in all our precincts. And we make sure, and they call us to the table, and we answer up for it. So we have that relationship. And we always open to have communication with other, groups out there, because we're big on the community policing. And like mentioned earlier, we do have a policy because we believe strongly in it. And that's something that we take very seriously. So we have our community service officers. We have our school resource officers. We try to do a lot of events out there. We try to target the areas that really need, our assistance, our help. We walk around. We try to talk to the community, to the people out there to see if there's issues in the area. Our community service officers, they go out. They clean up areas. They deal with the graffiti. If they have a complaint about what's going on in neighborhoods, they report it. So this is stuff that we actively do every single day. So if you have an issue, we're always available on one aspect or another. So, you can always come out. We have an open door policy. We'll speak to you, as much as we can, or we'll give you somebody that can address your situation. We can't always have the public safety director front and center at every incident and every issue. But that's in any type of department that you have, because that's one person. We have a whole department that's put in place to deal with different situations. And so when you tell us what the issue is, then we address that way. We send you over to the guys that have the knowledge and that have the experience to do the things that can assist you. So we're always there that way. So, we can't have everybody 100% satisfied. We do what we can do with the resources we have, and we try to be out there for you guys. So like was said earlier, if there's other things that we haven't addressed or wasn't able to address, you can always speak with us. You could talk to us. I introduced you to our guys that's here from Consent Decree. You could speak with any of those guys. Trust me, they're very smart. They know the answers. I go to them a lot for stuff. So, you can always come and talk to us. Like I said, you could call us. We're there. We'll answer you and everything of that nature. So before I take over the whole, thing here, I want to call Captain Carrilo up, because like I said, the one smart thing I'm going to do is call the person that knows more than I do about Consent Decree, so that he could properly answer your questions. But if there's any questions that I can answer, of course, I'm here for that.
Thank you, Director. Again, thank you, Pastor Gilmore, for allowing us the use of this wonderful house of worship. I'll keep my comments brief. I think much of what was said today really summarized a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about, and happy to answer any questions you may have. I'll give you a little bit of sort of background on me for those of you who don't know me. Again, my name is Leo Carrilo, born, raised here in Newark. You know, this work that I do is near and dear to my heart. Again, I grew up in the Ironbound section. I started volunteering in the Ironbound ambulance squad when I was 16 years old. So again, working with the community is something that's just been part of who I am. Helping the community is just part of what I do. I've been part of this unit since the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. And I started there as a sergeant, working with, at the time, Captain O'Hara, Director Ambrose, and have been in the unit through a couple promotions, and now as a captain, I'm there responsible for the unit, working alongside other captains that have been there with me, like Captain George, Captain Rio, Sergeant Phoebus, Deputy Chief Soares. Again, doing this work. And so what is my job, right? So our unit is responsible for implementing that reform that's contemplated in that document, the consent decree. So there's a number of paragraphs, and our job is to, again, work with the independent monitors, subject matter experts, folks from the Department of Justice, to make those changes real by developing policy, developing training, and then ensuring that all of that work is being done on a regular basis. So it has been an incredible journey for me to see the department where I started in 1998 to where we are today. We're definitely a completely different department. I could tell you that. And I could also tell you that we have not won, we have not finished, we are not completed. This work is ongoing, and it has to continue. And so I echo the sentiment the community mentioned earlier, like what happens when the consent decree goes away, right? My plan is to have a unit that is there, that is responsible for ensuring that this constitutional policing continues. So whenever that date may be, that is how we have to move forward, to ensure that there's a unit responsible for this area to look at things. Because remember, Office of Professional Standards is going to look at complaints made by the community. We're there ahead of that, right? We're there looking at video. We're looking at things that people aren't complaining about. So again, happy to answer some questions that anyone may have regarding the consent decree team in the PD or any other issues that possibly weren't answered before. Absolutely, be happy to. Yes, hi.
I think this is the appropriate time to ask a question. Thank you for deferring me to Officer Carrilo. So, like I said, we're speaking of trends and how NPD has gotten better.
Mm-hmm.
How do you track the trends that did not meet the 95%? What happened to the cars with no rear cameras? What happens to the percentage of officers reporting other officers? And for the 48 to 65% in compliance for searches in cars and the streets, how accurate was that reporting, and what happened to those officers after? So I guess I'm looking for the activity that happens for those that did not meet the 95%.
Absolutely, yeah, no, happy to answer that. So when we get a report back from the monitoring team that says there's a deficiency in something, we take a hard look at what they do. The good thing that the monitoring team does is they don't just tell us we failed. They'll actually give us a roadmap. They'll give us recommendations as to things that we should do. So for instance, when we did that searches audit, I remember vividly because again, I was sort of in it, right? So what was the issue that was happening? So one of the things that we implemented for stops is a 2-page report to capture all of the data points required in the consent decree, right? So you think, wow, 2 pages? Before it was very little information that was captured. So now we have 2 pages worth of information. So there was a confusion amongst officers. Now you're thinking about the time that the audit was done and the time frame that was the new reports were implemented and time the audit was conducted. It was a short period of time, so it was new to the officers and they're getting used to doing it. So one section of the report talks about frisking an individual and conducting a search of an individual. So officers were checking off frisk and checking off search just as a matter of practice. And when reviewing the video, a search did occur, incident to arrest, which was lawful, so the actions of the officer were lawful. However, there was no actual frisk that occurred. So it was important to the monitoring team to let us know that the officers need to understand the distinction between a Terry frisk or a frisk of the outer garments for safety, and to be able to document exactly what that risk was, and the search incident to arrest, right, which is they need probable cause for that search. So that distinction was important, and that's why we did so poorly in that one specific incident. So now, when you talk about what happened to the officers, when you talk about officers, they take a sample of a population. So say, for instance, if you're looking at 4 months or 6 months worth of data, there may be 10,000 incidents during that time frame. And I'm just saying numbers just for the sake of explanation. They'll take a sample, a representative sample of the whole. So if it's 10,000, they'll look at, say, 200 or 300. So it's not every single officer, but it's the trend of the department overall. And it's representative of the department as a whole. So we normally address these issues holistically to the whole department, put these memos out to the whole department, or train officers or tweak training to make sure that they're getting these pieces. You know, so around stop, search, and arrest, we have attorneys that specialized in this type of work to conduct the training. We had Mr. Bradley, we have Mr. Horowitz in there now. So again, folks that sort of specialize in stuff, and this is what they're doing, right? So we tweak our training, we tweak our memos to just ensure that they understand what it is that they're doing and to make it better. And then subsequent audit, we've improved that portion and things that we saw.
Can I ask my question? Yeah, thank you. With respect to community engagements, like what's your plan for community engagement? My foot just fell asleep, I'm sorry. What's your plan for community engagements? Can you kind of give us a big picture example of it? How do you plan to make it inclusive to all people in Newark, especially those with language barriers, knowing, you know, you grew up in Ironbound, I also grew up in Ironbound, you know, and how do you plan to track each officer's engagement with community?
Absolutely, that's work that's, again, been near and dear to my heart. It's stuff that I worked on when I first got to the unit. Again, we developed a lot of this work throughout the last, number of years. So, for instance, how do we track engagement? So, originally, we were tracking stuff on paper, right? Much like the General Harvey gave an example earlier about how like when you go to the doctor's office, you have all these paper documents, right? So, I was tasked with tabulating all of those reports. I literally had stacks of paper on my desk, and it was just absolutely overwhelming. Like, I had different color markers and highlighters to be able to keep track of all the different things we're doing. So out of that need, I was able to work with some subject matter experts of the monitoring team to come up with a database that tracks community engagement, right? So I was able to work with them using Microsoft Forms, and we're able to develop a database where we're capturing community engagements by the officer on their phones. So literally, they get into an engagement, they can just literally put it in, and it dumps into a database that I'm able to then analyze. And we actually take that information and we pump it out to our ComStat meetings to the commander so they could see in real time what their engagement numbers look like. Actually, Sergeant Phoebus is one of the ones who helps us get that information out to the commander so they can see where their engagements are. So if they're a little bit less, a little bit more, they'll be able to track that. Now, big concern with that is that that's a quantitative measure. We're counting numbers. And really, for community engagement, that doesn't do it. We need that quality, right? Like, what is it actually? What are we getting out of it, right? Yeah. And that's the part that, as far as reporting, has been somewhat of a challenge. Because these reports, you have to talk about the individual things that we're doing and talk about, like, what effect they're having. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. Public Safety Youth Academy, right? We bring in youth from the community that want to participate in the program, and we give them an experience of what it's like to be a firefighter, a police officer. We give them training. What is the goal? Why did we do that? Because kids have nothing to do in the summer. So we actually bring them in, get them off the street, and work with them, right? We have a basketball team, does the same thing, right? We have a number of different programs that are aimed at specific concerns that the community have. So I believe that work is ongoing. Meaningful work. I can go into things like the violence intervention work that goes on a day-to-day basis. It is absolutely incredible what they're able to do. I was saying this to Ms. Schwartz earlier, is that there was a void that we didn't know existed, that Office of Violence Prevention has been able to come in and fill that void to do work that we didn't even understand was possible. So again, with Director Urie, Director Ford, to be able to just do this work in collaboration with the Newark Community Street Team, it's incredible. It really is. It has changed really public safety in the city in a meaningful way. So again, we're doing this work. We continue to do this work. We look forward to the audit. We want to bring all those stakeholders into the room when we actually go through this audit, because it's important work. That's just not the police. It's everyone involved, the community involved in this work.
And then 2 more comments, or well, pretty much, how can you include community leaders' input and engaging with the community the way we have been doing it, being a community leader myself? Can these meetings be held in each ward? I mean, it's hard for folks to get out to the South Ward. It was hard for me to even try to organize people to come out here. You know, last notice, I think I only had maybe a week or 2 to figure out how, you know, how am I going to get, you know, a van full of folks out here, just because the information that you are providing is important, and it should be accessible to everyone. So, yeah, just that'll be it for me. Oh, and then in terms of including the community leaders and the reporting, you know, how do you actively engage the leaders to do your reports, like especially for like the CCRB?
Yeah, absolutely. Very important, and honestly, it's been at the heart of the work that we've been doing here, especially with this consent decree. And again, under the recommendations of the monitoring team, of General Harvey and the folks from the Department of Justice, we brought the community in to be part of the policy development process. So in developing policies around use of force, around community engagement, around First Amendment right to record, around all of those policies, we had community forums, we got feedback, we incorporated feedback where it made sense and it was legal. We put those, you know, so again, the feedback from the community is important, and it's at the core of this reform. So, you know, the fingerprints of the community are part of this reform, and the reason why I believe we've had the successes we've had. Yes.
Yes, I would like to ask, from today, how much more time will it take for the Newark Police Department to become fully compliant with the consent decree? And then I'd also like to ask, and might not be fair for me to ask you that, maybe it needs to be asked of Attorney General Harvey, how much longer does he anticipate that the consent decree will have to be in effect?
Thank you, Mr. Ham. Yeah, I could make my attempt at answering that. I think there's 2 parts there. So what does it actually say in the consent decree? And I'll read it to you. It's paragraph 224 of the consent decree. It says, if after 7 years of the effective date, the parties disagree whether the city has been in full and effective compliance for 2 years, either party may file a motion requesting that the court terminate all or part of this agreement. So what that paragraph tells me that ultimately is, depending on what motions are made in court, the judge has the ultimate rule to decide whether or not the consent decree is here or gone. Now, the question of when. That 7-year anniversary is approaching towards the end of this year. So depending on what motions are filed in court in October, maybe November, or maybe even December, would potentially tell where we go from here. So now, does it mean that we're going to be out of the consent decree? Again, General Harvey provided a good summary, right? There's areas we've had successes in, and there's areas where we need to do and continue to do some work. So that may look, you know, that may look different than what it looks like today. We may be working with the monitor. We may be working with the Department of Justice. We may be working independently with a neutral body, maybe the CCRB. I don't know what the future holds. I can tell you that, again, what I said at the very beginning of this process, I think we've made amazing gains. I think this is not the same department I joined in 1998, but the work needs to continue at some level, whether it be a unit within the department or collaborating with our federal partners or an independent monitor or what have you. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what's going to come of the court, but it could be as early. We'll see a change in the environment come towards the end of the year, potentially. Oh, absolutely.
Hello, Mr. Ham. For those who don't know me, I'm Philip Selinger, the U.S. Attorney. We agree with the comments about the substantial progress that has been made by Newark. We agree with Mr. Harvey's comments, and we agree with the comments by the Department of Newark as well. The Department of Justice is committed to staying in this until there is full and effective compliance with the consent decree. So I would anticipate that as a result of either negotiations with the parties in the court or otherwise, that after the current termination of the consent decree, both the consent decree and the monitorship would continue in some form. It might be a more limited form, and in areas where there has been a determination of full and effective compliance, that those issues may be carved out, but that a consent decree and a monitorship would continue thereafter until there is full and effective compliance, which the Department of Justice is committed to.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, yes, ma'am.
My name is Pam McCauley. My name is Pam McCauley. I work for the Essex County Prosecutor's Office, but I am not here representing my office. I am here as a concerned resident of Newark. So the director made reference to the 40 hours of training that includes search and seizure, use of force, and implicit bias. My question is, what is the breakdown of the 40-hour training? And I know, and I'm also inquiring about how many hours does law enforcement, not only police officers, but those in supervisory positions, how many hours are dedicated to intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking? I am most concerned about the report writing and how police officers ask questions to engage responses from victims so that we have more successful investigations and subsequent prosecutions so that we can all focus on public safety. And my last question, as this pertains to community engagement, it starts with response time. So if I'm calling the police because I need help, I expect a quick response. Case in point, on Saturday, I was at a block party. There was someone in obvious crisis. We didn't know whether or not she was having a heart attack or a stroke. It was almost 20 minutes before police arrived on scene and about 30 minutes before EMT. So what's the standard, and what can we expect as citizens here in terms of response times to our critical incidents?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those questions. I'll try to get them one at a time. As far as the breakdown for the 40 hours of training, we actually collaborated with the All-Stars group to develop a youth engagement strategy training. So we start out the week with that. Yes.
So what I'm seeing in terms of the reports that come across my desk that I review, I can't give you a specific percentage, but overwhelmingly, the cases that come through my office are domestic violence, intimate partner violence related, sexual assault, or human trafficking. So my question is not for youth engagement. I want to know what kind of training, and it has to go beyond the 4 hours or the 8 hours or the 12 hours for this type of training. Is that part of the policy? And I'm putting it out there, I would like to have that considered, that we increase the number of hours in these critical areas. We all know that what we see out in these streets is a reflection of what's going on in the home. So if we are going to engage and address public safety, not just community policing, but public safety and everybody, because I have a right to be able to move around and feel safe doing the work that I do. We need more in these areas, and that's not to say that we don't need training in search and seizure and use of force. I would like to see parallel training in these areas.
Got it, thank you. My apologies. I thought the first part of your question was, you wanted to know the breakdown of the 40 hour. That's what I was doing. I was telling you what happened on Monday. But I completely hear you. I completely understand. I can tell you very simply and generally that the 40-hour training is based around the policy that was developed, the policies that were developed and requirements of the consent decree. Separately from what we're required to do from the consent decree, the New Jersey Attorney General also has mandates as far as training. They're called clear training, and every officer has to participate in that training every year. But I hear you loud and clear. It's 4 hours for this year. We're doing, and it could be more, right? So I hear you, and what I want to do is, if you have time, we could speak later, and we could push recommendations on what that training looks like. And for next year, we're putting together the syllabus and curriculum for what we're going to be presenting next year. And if it makes sense, we could potentially incorporate that, because again, it's coming from the community. And like what I said earlier, and I mean it, is that this reform process has the fingerprints of the community all over it. And it wouldn't be meaningful, and I don't think it would have worked if it wasn't that way. So I hear you, I respect that, and let's make something real for the department. Let's make some real change. And again, I've worked with folks in the room that know that I'm sincere when I talk about that, so absolutely. Thank you. So just to give you an understanding of how our calls for service work at the call center, depending on the priority that's assigned to the job, we have what's called dispatch goals. So, a certain type of assignment, the highest level would be like an 8 level, and, it's got to be out within so many minutes, within like 2 minutes or 3 minutes from the time that the officer receives the call. Now, that is coupled or works with or against, depending on how many officers are available in that precinct, right? So if it's, for whatever reason, a very busy day, there's a potential that based on that queue and those queue goals, that we don't have an officer available to respond. So there may be multiple emergencies going on at one time, which unfortunately here in the city, it often happens. So what we do is, we keep the calls precinct by precinct. And one of the things that we've done based on this consent decree and an effort to get into the community is we've actually created more precincts. So early on, if you remember, we had 4, the north, the east, the west, and the south, and that was it. And the geographical footprint of each of those precincts is very, very large. And what we did is we created sort of different precincts, right? We created a precinct up in the Roseville section of the North District, at the 7th precinct. That took an area what was at one time called 212 sector, which is approximately the size in terms of population of East Orange. And we made it its own precinct to really have a commander responsible, officers that know that geographical area. It really talks to those areas of the consent decree and the community engagement piece, which is we're redeploying officers in a more sort of focused or concentrated areas. So things like that. So again, the amount of officers available at the time could impact the potential response times. And believe me, we want to get to the scenes as fast as possible, as safely as possible. We want to get there, especially when someone is experiencing some type of crisis. And I tell, when I get to teach every once in a while, it's what I started doing because of my EMS background. I taught in the academy. And what I tell the officers all the time when I teach is that it may be your 8th call of the day or your 10th call of the day, but for that person, it is the most difficult time they're going through in their life, and you have to treat them with that respect, and you have to treat them accordingly, because again, this is the first time they may be interacting with a police officer, and it may be the last time they're interacting with a police officer, and that interaction will last a lifetime, you know, and whether that interaction was positive or negative, it's going to stay with them forever. So it's very important, those interactions, and again, it's what we try to push out to the police officers.
Mic check, can y'all hear me? I've been trying to figure out how to word what I want to raise, but the main thing I want to get over, and I want to get it over not just to the police department, not just to the consent decree team, and not just to the monitor and the DOJ, I want to get it over to everybody. There is real anxiety in this community right now about where we are and where this process had been going by virtue of some very hard work that's been put in by a lot of us on both sides of this, and we are starting to see a regression on the other side. And we can talk about what that regression looks like. It looks like Elijah Garcia, a kid who gets killed in a sports activity because neither Essex County or Newark knew how to respond to that 911 call. And we have been screaming about that in this town for decades. For decades. It looks like Carl Dorsey, after a whole year of Newark police not firing a shot, an undercover officer kills him in a questionable situation with a bad history, and that officer is not disciplined. It looks like a fresh study coming down from Fairleigh Dickinson University saying out of all the wards in this town where there's a large distrust still of Newark police after all this hard work, it's in the South Ward where we've done most of the work. So I want y'all to hear this anxiety from the community. We need this work to continue. We need the buy-in that we thought we had, from leadership in this town to wake back up and get back with the program. I'm disappointed that our new public safety director isn't here. The community doesn't know him. We didn't know O'Hara, all due respect. We don't know this new guy. Where's he at? All due respect. So we need y'all to, consent decrees need to be strengthened. What do we do with jump out boys that don't comply? Where's the discipline? What happens when someone wants to come and talk to the feds and say, can you make sure that I'm going to be safe talking to you? That's still a problem too on the federal side. So hear the anxiety in these questions. I appreciate everybody that's in this room. Carrilo, we love you. You've been on the case. You've been there, right? Mr. Salinger, we appreciate you here, but we need you to hear us. We're not getting enough from all sides. And we're at a crossroads with this consent decree. And for those who say it costs too much, let me say this. Black and brown lives matter. We're worth the money. So that might not be a question. But folks have been being very diplomatic, really trying to work the process, hiding their anxieties. I ain't one for that. We need y'all to hear us.
I'll simply say, I hear you, Said. I'm with you. You know I'm always there. Always available to pick up my phone. And whatever we need to do, we'll meet up and address.
I just want to take a little bit more time to talk about, I know it was highlighted around the crossing guard piece, but I just want to get really granular with it, if you don't mind.
Sure.
There is legislation that we've drafted from community to address the current laws around who can be a crossing guard, and we drafted that with Senator Ruiz, and it was sent to, again, the Public Safety Director's office, and it was turned back around and negated as no good. And so I would ask that we'll send you a copy of the legislation so that you can see it. This really just opens the gate to really who can actually work and become crossing guards. We've identified 3 areas of folks or residents who are not able to become crossing guards, those who have offenses against children and women, those who have any aggravated assaults, which we're still trying to figure that piece out. Because if you and I fight, Carrilo, I'll probably get aggravated assault. But it's just a disagreement, and we see that within community. And so we're trying to work around that legislation so that we can open the gates to actually who can become crossing guards outside of just seniors. So I'd love to share that with you. Last thing I would say is that in reference to the calls for service, I would have you guys take a look at what LA County is doing. I saw this report in May that they are no longer going to answer to about 23 different type of category calls in the county of LA, and what they're really doing is just dispatching those calls back out to community. Unfortunately, we do not have, the Office of Violence Prevention has about 5% of the police budget, around $11 million a year. It really will take about 20% of the police budget to actually include community in responding to some of these concerns that we're having. But I would look at LA County as they put forth 23 different incidents that they would not respond to, and they're really relying on the community to do that. And so we can look at that model and bring it here to Newark and really change the system. So I just want to recap. We want to look at the legislation that we gave to that we drafted with Senator Ruiz that your office can say okay to, and really a profound okay that give us a bill number so that we can then advocate across the state so that we can change lives and save kids' lives in the state. And then the second piece is looking at LA County. Thanks.
Yeah, and to answer that, absolutely. All doors always open and willing to look through all that anytime. You got my contact info.
I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. We started 30 minutes late, and so we're now at 8:30. So if you want to take just a few more questions, and then we could conclude.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I see one hand, Ms. Smith, I think. You had a question, Smith? Hi.
Thank you, Captain. You've always been really helpful and responsive, so I want to acknowledge you for that. I wanted to ask 2 questions. Does the Consent Decree Division only investigate community engagement, complaints, and compliance around stops, frisks, and arrest? And is there an investigative process of misconduct within the department and the overall engagement and behavior of law enforcement personnel? And then my next question is, are you able to provide us guidance on the CCRB and how to initiate any complaints?
Yeah, certainly. So the first part of sort of our role within the department. So primary is to develop policy and plan things, right? That's like the core of what we do. And that unit became the unit that's responsible for implementing reform. So as part of that reform process is to help develop training, to ensure that the training is being done. Many times we're actually conducting the training ourselves, and then audit that process. Separately and apart from that, there are times where potentially folks from within our unit are assigned an investigation that can't be at internal affairs for whatever reason, or because it's something minor, or it's something that's major, or involving something that may cause a conflict. That the county doesn't want, we would potentially do that. But again, not our primary role, but it does occur from time to time. I think that answered the first and second part of the question, and the third part was?
Well, I was just inquiring about the CCRB.
Yeah, CCRB, sorry, yep. And then so the CCRB process, I can tell you that we've collaborated over time to, in some of our policy development piece, we collaborated. Recently, we developed an MOU to make sure that sort of all the ground rules are set. We're actually set to meet sometime next week. I think as early as next week, we have some time to meet. So to sort of lay out a framework of to how we could continue moving forward. One of the things that we have to do internally is once that process is established is to develop policy. We have a draft policy already written. So it's a matter of, everyone sort of approve that process, everybody understand what it is, and move forward from there. So we're we're ready to engage and work with the CCRB to get the work done.
Okay, well, hopefully that will happen, and citizens and civilians will be invited to
Yeah,
engage.
we work with Mr.
you all.
Robinson, and happy to do so. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it. We're going to hang around after the meeting to answer any more questions or anything that you may have. But again, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Mr. Wood, I don't know if you're here, if you had any closing remarks. No? Thank you all. Thank you for coming tonight. Sorry. I called it. Yeah.
One moment, everybody. Just one moment. Let me just ask Mr. Harvey, could you come up one more time? Just a point of personal privilege. Larry Ham wanted to ask one last question, so I just wanted to make sure. You asked it already? Yes. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'm too busy doing the community engagement outside. I totally missed that part. Yeah. Okay, actually, never mind. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and be safe. Thanks.